There is one alone, and there is not a second. Yea, he hath neither child nor brother, yet is there no end of all his labor. Neither is his eye satisfied with riches, neither saith he, For whom do I labor, and bereave my soul of good? This is also vanity, yea, it is a sore travail. Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their labor. For if they fall, the one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him that is alone when he falleth, for he hath not another to lift him up. Again, if two lie together, then they have heat. But how can one be warm alone? And if one prevail against him, two shall withstand him. And a threefold cord is not quickly broken. The thing about unity is it's necessary. When we're unified, there's something to look forward to. If it's just me all the days of my life, what profit is there in that? But if I have a son or a daughter to give an inheritance, then I have something to work for. If I have a wife to, by reason of my wife, expand my standard of living, then I have cause for all my labor. But me and myself, that's not enough. That's not worth putting in the effort. But with the aspiration to have a wife and children, or in the woman's case, a husband and children, when we have the sufficiency that God has already provided, when we act wisely in using what God has already provided us, then we get somewhere. Because if we think that our need is not met, then we have not looked at all that is available to us. And if we think we must do things alone, then we look too deeply to the faults of those around us instead of their benefits. It's not an issue of not being perfect. It's an issue of not being God. And while we can be in the likeness of God, we're made in His image, and we're called to be perfect as He is perfect. The fact of, which actually it's not even that, because the same people who are not satisfied with you as their aid, as their help, would not be are not satisfied with God as their help. It's not an issue of are you perfect, it's an issue of they wouldn't accept it even if God was providing it, because God may well be providing it through you. There are times where it's easier to do a thing alone, but there's a much greater reward when we do things together than alone. And there's a distinction in that. If you can do something without a bank, that's better than doing something with a bank. But if you can do something with a wife, that's better than doing something without a wife. Or if you can do something with your husband, that's better than doing something by yourself. What's the point of wealth if you're not going to share it? What's the point of having wholeness of life, wholeness of health, if you're not going to use it? what's the point in having all these God-given privileges that not all have had the fortune of having in spite of God's best efforts? There are still people that don't walk. There are still people that don't hear. There are still people that are lied to daily, saying, you can't do this, you can't do that. And yet, with God, nothing shall be impossible. And by God, all things are possible. But when we agree, when we have someone to agree with us for what we are praying for, what we are believing for, we're stronger for it. The Christ in us is no weakling. But do the math. Is the Christ in you more than the Christ in you and the Christ in somebody else? If you multiply the Christ in you by surrounding yourself with people who show the Christ in them, you are made stronger, not weaker. If you surround yourself with people who do not show the light of Christ, that's what's dampening your light. You're not around people who will believe with you, you're around people who will believe against you. And that's why when you pick a wife and when you pick a friend, now there's acquaintances, and whether they believe or do not believe, that's, well, you preach as you preach, you teach as you teach. But when it comes to friendship, and when it comes to the spouse, the children, that is a place for agreement. That is a place where you teach your children, we believe for impossible things, because with God all things are possible. Why then would we think that God's too busy to provide for his children? That's not a good father that can't provide for his children. I mean, in his word he says a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children. So how much more will he leave an inheritance for his children's children? And he has a lot of children. So check that. If God, by his word, says that a good man leaves an inheritance for his children's children, and God is the father of many children, then by that he would leave an inheritance. Well, he already has the inheritance of Christ. We are joint heirs of Christ, and by being joint heirs of Christ, we get everything Jesus gets, because we're married to Christ. We are the body of Christ. We are unified with Jesus. And when we're made stronger by a spouse, we're made stronger, well, we're made stronger by a believing spouse. We're made stronger by believing friends. We're made stronger by believing children. But if they are believing against us, well, they're hindering the process. Because you're supposed to have persecution from the world, and you're supposed to have persecution with the 100-fold blessing, but you shouldn't have persecution in your own household. I mean, disagreement, sure, but not persecution like from the world.